Welcome back. Now we answer questions we've received from you, our viewers. If you have a question, visit our website, QuranSpeaks.com. Dr. Shabir, here is a question. How much of Islam depends on hadith and how much can be known directly from the Quran?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I would say that, one has to take a balanced approach to hadith and use hadith in collaboration with the Quran in a balanced way. So to understand this balance, let's look at two extremes. One extreme is what I believe to be that position where people say, okay, we have the Quran alone, we don't need any hadith, the Quran is a self-sufficient book. And then they will cite statements from the Quran as well that seems to indicate that, right? And then, so they say we don't need hadith. Why do I think this is an extreme view? I think that there are several verses of the Quran which can be understood much better with reference to hadith. And hadith gives us the flesh.
Which verses, Dr. Shabir?
Like, for example, the hadith, the Quranic verse that says, فَلَمَّا قَضَى زَيْدٌ مِنْهَا وَطَرًا.
Okay.
When Zayd had fulfilled what he desired from his wife. So who is this Zayed? It's not specified in the Quran. So you need some external information about that. And that external information is found in hadith. A simple thing, Tabbat yada abi lahabin wa tab, which most Muslims know from memory. Tabbat yada abi lahab, may the hands of Abu Lahab perish. So who is this Abu Lahab? We want to know, right? You're not going to know from the Quran itself because it's not specified.
But none of these really affect our lives, right? In terms of our practice. These are just theoretical things that we would want to know just to kind of understand the context of the Quran.
Yes, true. And by understanding the context of the Quran, you understand the Quran better.
That's true.
And so this is one of the reasons you need the hadith, because it's going to explicate the Quranic verses. To understand any book, we pick up a book from any past time. To understand the book, you need to know something about the time. So hadith is going to tell you something about the time and place, the context, the weather, the social situation, and so on. And so it'll be irresponsible to pick up a book from any clime and say we don't need to know anything about the geography and the history and so on. So that's why I find that to be one extreme.
Yes. But even in terms of practices, do you think that it's important to understand the hadith as well?
Well, those who are going to say that, we need only the Quran, the common objection to them is that, okay, if you didn't have the hadith, how would you know how to pray, for example? And they would say, well, we would pray just like the Quran says to pray. And if the Quran doesn't give more details, then we don't need more details. We just pray according to what is mentioned in the Quran. So it's kind of a circular argument to say you need the hadith because the hadith is going to tell you how to pray, right? From their
or they
point of
say
view.
that there's a certain community practice that has developed over time,
Yes.
So,
but that community practice is also enshrined in hadith. It came to be recorded for us in the books of hadith and so on. Okay. But in any case, I wanted to say that that's one extreme, right? Now, on the other extreme is where we say that we need hadith for almost anything. And even hadiths which are contrary to the Quran are accepted. And somehow the Quran is shaved off a little bit, like verses of the Quran are made to fit within, boxes that the hadith it makes available. For the Quranic verses. Like, for example, when we talk about the punishment for adultery, the Quran mentions lashes, the hadith mentions stoning, and so people try to put them together by saying, okay, well, what the Quran is mentioning must be for the unmarried adulterer, the fornicator, and what the hadith is mentioning is a stricter penalty, and that is deserved by those who are already married and still commit adultery. So they make both work. Whereas if the Quran wanted both, the Quran could have easily said, this is the punishment for the unmarried person, this is the punishment for the married person, but the Quran doesn't say that. It has azaniyatu wazani, the fornicator, whether male or female, and doesn't specify married or unmarried. It could have easily done that, but it didn't. So it means that this applies to all, and that must be the Islamic punishment. If we call it, of course, that was at the time. In our present circumstances, we need to think think about how to apply that, when and where, to what extent, and so on, with what preconditions and all of that. The basic thing is that you have this contrast between the Quran and the Hadith, and scholars have tended in the mainstream Muslim tradition to incorporate both, but to do so, they have it meant curtailing the Quranic verse from applying to married adulterers, because they have hadith that deals, according to them, with married adulterers. It's easier.
And their justification is that the hadith is explaining the Quran.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And now they can take it even to a step further. In fact, one scholar I'm familiar with has actually done this. He said that let's say you have the Quran and you have the commentary on the Quran written on, like, around the verses. Now, when you're reading the commentary, or let's say it's in a separate book. You have the Quran on the one hand, you have a book of commentary on the Quran. So typically the commentary in the Quran will tell you everything that's in the Quran. The Quran wouldn't tell you everything that's in the commentary. So according to him, if you have the Quran, but he wasn't saying commentary, he's saying the hadith. The hadith is a commentary on the Quran. So if you have the hadith, you know everything that's in the Quran.
Okay.
And if you have the Quran, you don't know everything that's in the hadith. So if the hadith, in this case, turns to be more important than the Quran. And in fact, they have actually made it more important than the Quran, because they can easily explain something, like in the case of something mentioned in the Quran and then the contraries in the hadith, they can easily say, you know what, it was revealed like that in the Quran, but later on, the Prophet, peace be upon him, got some other revelation which he acted upon, and that revelation is equal to the revelation in the Quran. In fact, they have a narrative according to which the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, "Utitul Quran wa mithlahu ma'hu." I've been given the Quran and the likes of it, along with it. So that too is revelation, they say. And since that is the known practice from the Prophet, peace be upon him, it must be that this actually is the final thing, and this is equal to the Quran, but this has the advantage of being the known last practice of the Prophet, peace be upon him, whereas the Quran is written as a text and was recited, but is not necessarily the last thing that was practiced. So then they would give more credence to what is reported about the Prophet, peace be upon him, even though the reports themselves might be questionable, because Quran was collected and written down early, but the hadith collected and written down later, and within that period of time of oral transmission, a lot of errors could have and did creep into the system. So the bottom line is that how much hadith do we need? Yes, we need some, but not as much as people have applied, and we need to keep them in balance. The Quran trumps. So what the Quran says, that should not be sacrificed for something that is mentioned in a hadith, because the Quran is of undisputed authority and authenticity, whereas the hadith is of varying qualities when it comes to the authenticity. And when it comes to the authority, there are so many things that the Prophet, peace be upon him, did that he may not have intended to serve as legislation. He might have done something as a human being in his time and place, and he could, if he said, do this because this is part of the religion, then that's a different matter. But people tended to take everything that he said and make that a part of the religion, and he may not have intended that. So a balance is called for, and two extremes are before us. One is the extreme of rejecting the hadith altogether, saying we live by the Quran alone, which I find to be historically irresponsible. And on the other extreme is like incorporating so many hadith and using them to, supersede the Quran. That seems contrary to the whole logic of God revealing the message in the first place, and taking it upon himself to preserve this message. And whereas the hadith, of course, was recorded and transmitted later.
All right, thank you for that, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Muslim Media Hub, the new home of Let the Quran Speak.
Here we spread positivity and good. We help people experience the beauty of Islam and help them appreciate and understand Muslims.
This beautiful building we purchased at cost $2.3 million.
Yeah, we've already raised a third of that money, and with your help, inshallah, we can pay off the rest.
So we're looking for people who can give $1,000 each. If you can be part of the select group, that's amazing.
Otherwise, just please give whatever whatever you can. Every dollar counts.
It's our collective responsibility to share the message of Islam with our fellow human beings. Please help us continue this good work.
It's a sadaqah jariyah, something that will continue to be a benefit to the Muslim community long after Safiya and I are gone.
Please support our work at muslimmediahub.com.
Your support is zakat eligible and tax deductible.
May Allah bless you and your loved ones today and always. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.